All right, folks, this is Harris Sultan. Australia, just like many other Western countries, is under a serious threat of Islamization. Let me start this video by asking you a question. Can you name me an ideology that is responsible for 100% terrorist-related fatalities in Australia? It's the Hindus. No, can't be them. Must be the Buddhists. Must be the far-right fascists. No, it's not them either. Yes, you guessed it right. It's Islam. I mean, just this single fact alone should be enough for every single Australian to get up and say, something is wrong, okay? Even if you want to keep an open mind. Maybe it's some extremist people, but then you would ask yourself why there are no extremists in Hinduism or in Buddhism or even far-right ethno-nationalists. I mean, those guys are pretty scary, aren't they? They make Nazi salutes and they put swastika tattoos and everything. We have even deported some of them. How come they haven't even contributed to even 1% of terrorist-related fatalities in Australia? What's going on? What am I missing? Come on. And the story is not that much different elsewhere either. America, in the last 1 week alone, they have experienced 4 terrorist attacks. And guess which ideology was responsible there too? You guessed it right. It ain't a difficult question. Islam again. This problem is so widespread and problematic for a lot of decent people. Forget about the far left wokey loonies. People in the middle who mean well, who don't want to offend anyone, who want to keep an open mind. Even they say, what do we do with that? Maybe it's radical Islam. Sam Harris once said that the problem with fundamentalist Islam are the fundamentals of Islam. If Islam is a religion of peace, then how come extremist Muslims are not more peaceful? I actually have a very good example of a religion. You know, Jains believe in non-violence. So the more extremist you are in your Jainism, the more peaceful you are. Too stupidly peaceful, I'd say. Because extremist Jains don't even believe in taking antibiotics, for example. If they're driving and they see ants on the road, they would stop, because they wouldn't want to kill a single ant. Some people might say it's a noble position, but you get the point, right? So who's responsible for the Islamization of our country, despite having an overwhelming amount of evidence to suggest that that's a bad idea? Islam is a doctrine, it's an ideology. An ideology cannot survive without its followers. So who are the followers of Islam? Muslims. Are they good Muslims? Absolutely. But I have made this point many times before. There were good Germans in Germany as well in the 30s. In fact, only 24% of the Germans actually voted Hitler in. That means 77% of the Germans were good Germans. They didn't even like Hitler. But what happened to them? They became irrelevant. Of course, there were some really brave Germans too who were trying to actively assassinate Hitler, but I'm sorry, they were irrelevant. We still had the worst war in human history, and tens of millions of people died, despite having 77% of the German population as good people. So don't tell me that they are good Muslims. They are irrelevant. They become even more irrelevant when they don't do anything about the extremist ones. So far, what we've seen all across the Western world, these good Muslims cover for these bad Muslims. And none of our governments have even defined what a good Muslim is and what a bad Muslim is. We can make a very good checklist. If you bring your religion to your workplace, I'm sorry, that's against our Western secular liberal values. We don't want that. You want to pray? Go pray at home. By the way, Muslims are actually allowed to pray at home. They don't have to pray on the side of the street. They just do it to piss you off, like they just did it at Trafalgar Square a few days ago. Some estimates suggest nearly 5,000 Muslims prayed at Trafalgar Square, and their two-tier Keir Starmer said there's nothing wrong with that.
When I see religious events in Trafalgar Square, when I see Hindus celebrating Diwali, when I see Jews celebrating Hanukkah live, when I see Christians performing the Passion of Christ, or Muslims praying, that shows the great strength of our diversity and country. I've never heard her party call out anything other than the Muslim events. It's only when Muslims are praying. The only conclusion is the Tory party has got a problem with Muslims.
Of course, there's nothing wrong with that. Either he is a terribly ignorant person or he just doesn't care about the future of the country. And let me tell you, things are getting worse in Australia. This video is about Australia. So who is responsible for the Islamization of Australia? This clown is responsible for the Islamization of our country. And let me say that again. He is the worst prime minister in Australian history. We've had a pretty good run since the time of Bob Hawke and Paul Keating. Australia truly became a first world developed, rich, prosperous country after Bob Hawke. I don't know much about before that. My history is a bit weak. But since Bob Hawke, he is definitely, by far, the worst prime minister in Australian history. And to make matters worse, he actually won the second term as well. He will definitely not be winning the third term. If anyone is to blame that Australia is becoming very racist, Australia is leaning towards hard right politics, then he's responsible. Pauline Hanson, who I now admire a lot, and I would be telling all patriotic Australians to vote for her. And not that she needs my help, it's just what the circumstances demand. Our country is going down the drain so rapidly that Pauline Hanson seems like the only light at the end of the tunnel. Have a listen to him. These guys have given up. They've raised their hands. They're basically saying, this is it. This is the future. Listen to this clown.
And there'll be some politicians, some of which have risen up recently in polling.
He's talking about Pauline Hanson, and look what he's going to accuse her of.
Who are essentially appealing to vote for us and the world will stop. Or worse still, we'll go back to the Australia of the 1950s or 60s.
She has never said that. She doesn't say that. And I know that's not what she believes in. She doesn't believe in white Australia. She doesn't say that no non-whites are allowed in Australia. She doesn't believe in that. Even a lot of people, because she covers a lot of right-wing voter base. So, of course, you'll have some people on the far right who would be leaning towards her, but she won't be catering for them. I can assure you of that. But what is her message? Her message is that we need to preserve Australian values. It's a very simple message. I'm a brown person. I wasn't born in Australia. I moved to Australia when I was 19 years old. I am a former Muslim, so I know a thing or two about Islam and Muslims. And I'm telling you that she is right. There is nothing wrong in trying to preserve your values, which are completely antithetical to Islamic values. This is why every country that you look at, Islam represent from 90%, as is the case in the UK, France, and Germany, up to 100% of its share of terrorist-related fatalities. This is, again, a very cheap stunt they have tried and tested in Britain. Their Conservative Party is now literally repeating what Tommy Robinson used to say 20 years ago, what I used to say 10 years ago. They're literally repeating those talking points, and they used to accuse people like Tommy Robinson, far-right fascists. Now the mainstream party is repeating those talking points. You know why? Because you can't hide it anymore. And their lefty woke politicians are still calling them far-right fascists. So if your mainstream political parties are going to start repeating the talking points of Tommy Robinson, then pick a lane. Are our mainstream political parties becoming far-right fascists? And if that is the case, then why is that the case? Listen to this clown.
With the same population that look like that. That's not going to happen.
Again, this is a misrepresentation of her argument. She's not asking for a white Australia policy. I am saying that as a brown person, that we should not let the white population of Australia to fall below 90%. Not because white is a superior race. I would say the same thing about the Japanese people and the South Korean people and the Chinese people in their respective countries. Why? Because if Japan has to remain Japan, then it has to remain in control of predominantly Japanese people. I would say the same thing about Pakistan and Saudi Arabia and the UAE. You know, the UAE is very multi-ethnic and multicultural, but when it comes to their power, when it comes to their values, it's 100% Arab. Fair enough. I'm not going to lecture them. I'm not going to tell them how to run their countries, because who are we to give them lectures on multiculturalism? when we can see what has happened to the UK, what is happening to Australia. We can see what's happening. I am old enough to remember how peaceful Australia was 20 years ago. I'm old enough to remember that. And I'm sure there are plenty of people old enough to remember that. Yeah, we had some bar fights. We had some drunk Aussies. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but whatever it was, every country like Australia is allowed to have its own fair share of problems. Australia also had pedophiles. Australia also had drug abuse and domestic violence problems. Yes, no one is saying that those problems didn't exist in Australia, but they were Australian problems. In Australia, people do not celebrate pedophiles. In certain cultures, people do, because their holiest figure married a little girl. And they double down and they say, yeah, it's okay. So what? There's nothing wrong with that. It's better than these loose white women dancing away in nightclubs. It's better than that. Better to get married young and early.
I believe the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, married Aisha at 6 and he consummated marriage at 9. I have zero problem with that at all.
I am past the stage of arguing with them and telling them, hey, you know what? No, that's not right. You shouldn't be kids. I'm past that. You know what? You want to do that? Go do it in your country. But we have these politicians along the way. They're saying, no, we have to import people.
That's not going to happen. And it's a fool's errand. Well,
it's not a fool's errand. It's the need of the hour. We have to maintain Australian culture as the dominant culture of the country.
What we need to do is to make sure that we acknowledge that this is a rapid period of change. That won't continue.
This is a rapid period of change. He's bringing in more people. Apparently, a new report came out just yesterday. Despite him saying that he's going to cut down on immigration, 2025 attracted more immigrants than any other period in Australian history. Albeit, most people are coming from India, and Indians do not pose a violent threat to Australia. But having said that again, I want Australia to remain Australia. And for that to happen, we need mainstream Australian population to remain Australian population. When we bring in people in smaller quantities, then we can hope that they will integrate.
But we need to make sure that governments work with industry and civil society to shape that change in Australia's national interest. If we do that, we, the greatest country on earth, can be even more successful into the future. I'm certainly of that view.
Yeah, Australia is a lot less safer than it used to be. We've had so many terrorist attacks in Australia, all done by one particular community, and Australians are correct to say that we don't want any more of that. Our streets are becoming more and more unrecognizable. I've seen that. It's not as bad as the UK, but it's getting there. As long as we have this man in power, as long as we have these people with their globalist socialist agenda in power. I also worry that just like in the UK, we have a new left, which is the Greens, who are full on batshit crazy. You think Mehreen Faruqi is crazy? Don't get me wrong, she's crazy. But the Greens in Australia, they are a minor party. But in the UK, they have become the second biggest political party. They genuinely believe that they can pull 100, 150 seats in the next general election. And they have announced some of their economic policies. They literally believe in seizing control over the means of production. They believe in acquiring private businesses and giving the ownership or stake of private companies to their employees. Seriously, totally batshit crazy. It just cannot work. The UK is already hemorrhaging a lot of talent. A lot of high-paying, high-skilled people are leaving the UK because not only its social structure is collapsing, but also the economic model is collapsing because they're leaning more and more towards socialist principles. And that's what's going to keep happening in Australia. And I reckon Anthony Albanese is the worst prime minister in Australian history, but he's going to double down in his socialist, globalist, Marxist immigration agenda. Because if he toughens his stance and leans a little bit more towards the right, then he risks losing Labour as the left of Australia and might get replaced by the Greens, which is even a worse scenario in our case. So we have a new right in Australia, which is One Nation Party, but I think we're going to have a new left in Australia as well, which is going to be the Greens. Don't think for a moment that we are safe. So, yeah, interesting times ahead.